In this video, we are going to have a look at Nikon's second generation high resolution full frame mirrorless camera, the Nikon Z7 II. And if you are currently shooting with a Nikon D850 and have been thinking about whether you should move to the Nikon Z7 II, I'm going to do some comparison between these two cameras, and I'm going to share with you what are the pros and cons if you move from the D850 to the Nikon Z7 II. Kia ora, good morning everyone, Rich Wong here, welcome back to the channel. When Nikon released the Z7 about 2 years ago, a lot of D850 shooters were quite interested in moving to the Z7. But if you compare Z7 with D850, there are a couple of key features that is missing. For example, it doesn't have a dual memory card slot, it doesn't have the fully functional battery grip. So a lot of D850 shooters in the end decided they just want to stick with their D850. But now, Nikon just released the Z7 II, and it has addressed pretty much all the major complaints about the original Z7. Now it has the dual memory card slot, it has a fully functional battery grip, it also has dual processor, which should give you better autofocus performance. So does that mean the Z7 II is finally a better camera than the D850, and does that mean the D850 users should upgrade to the Z7 II? And also, what are the biggest difference between shooting with a Z7 II compared to a D850? We are going to talk about them all in this video. To me, there are two biggest differences between the body design of the Nikon Z7 II and the Nikon D850. The first one is the design of the Nikon Z7 II is probably closer to the Nikon D750 series DSLR rather than the D800 series camera. What I mean is, for example, if you look at the top dial here, this is a bit different to the D800 series cameras, and it is a lot closer to the dial that you can find on the Nikon D750. And also, for example, if you look at the shape of the viewfinder, usually the D800 series or the professional Nikon DSLR has a rounded viewfinder, while the Z7 II has the more normal rectangular shaped viewfinder. And the second major difference is the size of the Z7 II is quite a bit smaller than the D850. If I put them side by side, you can easily see that the D850 is quite a bit bigger, quite a bit taller, and also it is quite a bit heavier than the Z7 II. So I think for most people, you would love the smaller, more compact and also lighter body of the Z7 II. That means you can carry it a lot easier. But if you are someone with a very big hand, then you would probably prefer the larger grip on the Nikon D850, which feel more comfortable, especially if you pair it with a heavier lens. Having said that, the grip on the Z7 II is still very comfortable. It is a bit smaller, but it is still probably one of the best feeling, the most comfortable grip on all the full frame mirrorless cameras in the market right now. When you pick up the Z7 II and start taking photo with this camera, I think the biggest difference between this camera and the Nikon D850 would be the viewfinder. The Z7 II uses a 3.69 million dot electronic viewfinder. This is the same viewfinder on the original Z7. I have mentioned in many of my previous videos that I talk about the difference between an electronic viewfinder and optical viewfinder. In case you haven't watched any of those videos, I'm going to repeat quickly again. To me, after shooting with DSLR for so many years, and also I spent the last 2 years mostly shooting weddings with a DSLR and a mirrorless camera side by side, I have to say I really prefer to use a electronic viewfinder than the optical viewfinder, even though before that I really loved the big and bright optical viewfinder on the professional Nikon DSLR, but there are just so many benefits that the electronic viewfinder can offer you that the optical viewfinder just can't offer. The first thing is, when you are looking through the electronic viewfinder, pretty much what you see is what you will get. So what I mean is, when you look through the electronic viewfinder, you can preview the exposure of the photo pretty accurately, and you can also preview the white balance. So when you are adjusting, for example, the exposure compensation, or when you are changing white balance, you can immediately see the effect of your changes through the viewfinder, through the electronic viewfinder immediately, and that just make taking photos so much easier. You no longer will have the surprise that after you took a photo and then when you check the photo later on, you find out the photo was completely overexposed or underexposed, or you were using a completely incorrect white balance, especially if you are shooting JPEG that you cannot fix it easily in post-processing. So all these things wouldn't happen if you are shooting with a mirrorless camera like this Z7 II, because you can get the camera to render the preview of what the photo looks like even before you click the shutter button. And also another advantage is there are a lot of overlay information that you can place on top of the viewfinder image when you are taking photos. For example, you can display the histogram, and you can see a lot of other information in the electronic viewfinder as well when you are taking photos. So again, that just make it a lot easier when you are taking photo, or when you are changing settings. You know exactly what you are changing and also the effect of your changes. And after you took the photo, you can also immediately review the photo if you want through the electronic viewfinder without having to move your eye away from the viewfinder and then look at the back of the LCD screen. You no longer have to do that. You can do it all when your eye is still stick on the electronic viewfinder. And just overall, there are so many advantages when shooting with the electronic viewfinder compared to the optical viewfinder. Oh, there's another thing I nearly forgot to say is, there's something that is very important and something I noticed when I was shooting weddings and events using a DSLR and a mirrorless camera side by side. When I am taking photo in a dark venue, especially when I'm using a slightly slower lens. And what I mean slightly slower means maybe a f4 lens or even f2.8 lens compared to the f1.4 lens. I noticed that when I look through the viewfinder, a lot of time I actually cannot see the face of the subject that I'm shooting. So for example, if I want to catch some like the best moment, I want to catch, like for example, someone is smiling, I cannot see very clearly through the optical viewfinder. But if I use a mirrorless camera, because the camera will help me boost the brightness of the scene, so I can see everything very clearly, even when I'm shooting in a very dark area. And that is something I noticed when I was shooting weddings using a Nikon D800 or a Nikon DF side by side with my Nikon Z6, which has the exactly same electronic viewfinder as the Nikon Z7 II. So if you are also someone who have to take photo under low light condition quite often, once you try the electronic viewfinder on the Nikon Z7 II, I guess you would really enjoy shooting with the electronic viewfinder compared to the optical viewfinder on the D850. But while I really like the electronic viewfinder on the Z7 II, there is still some advantage that is offered by the optical viewfinder on the D850, and that is you don't have to power on the camera and you can still look through the viewfinder and you can see the frame, you can preview the frame, and if you turn on the camera, you can pretty much start shooting right away. While with the mirrorless camera like the Z7 II, if you turn off the camera, you see nothing through the electronic viewfinder as you would probably expect it, and when you turn it on, there is a little bit of delay before the electronic viewfinder is turned on. The delay is not too bad, it's probably around 1 second or maybe just under 1 second. So if you compare to some other mirrorless camera in the market, The delay is actually pretty good, but still there is still a little bit of delay between you turn on the camera and before you can look at the scene through the electronic viewfinder. The official battery life of the Nikon Z7 II is 360 shots if you are shooting using the electronic viewfinder, or 420 shots if you are shooting using the LCD screen. Now that figure definitely sounds very low, especially if you compare to the official figure with a DSLR like the D850. But in real life, I found I can definitely take a lot more photos using the Z7 II compared to the official figures. Typically, I can get at least around 1000 photos per battery with the Z7 II, and that is without doing a lot of burst shooting. If I do burst shooting, I can get a lot higher number of shots per charge. And also another thing is, with the Z7 II and also the EN-EL15C battery, you can use a USB power source to directly charge the battery through the camera body, or you can even power the camera using the USB power source. So this is a big advantage when you are traveling, so that you can always top up the battery easily or just power the camera using an external USB power source. But compare this with the D850, the battery life of the D850 is definitely a lot better than the Z7 II if you are shooting using the optical viewfinder. If you are also a videographer or interested in starting to shoot some video with your camera, the Z7 II has some pretty nice video recording feature. It can record 4K video up to 60 frames per second, and when you are shooting 4K at 60 frames per second, there is only a very small crop. The crop is only 1.08, which is better than a lot of other full frame camera in the market right now. It can also output 4K 10-bit video through its HDMI output port, so that you can capture high dynamic scene in much better quality using an external recorder recording in the flat picture profile or in HDR format. And with the paid firmware upgrade, the Z7 II can also output raw video footage to an external recorder. And while most other mirrorless camera that can output raw video footage, they only support the ProRes RAW, with the Z7 II, you can choose to output either in the ProRes RAW format, or you can choose to output in the Blackmagic RAW format. One thing you need to notice is when you are recording raw video using the Z7 II, and when you are recording in 4K resolution, there is a approximately 1.5 crop. While I haven't really got a chance to test the raw video output from the Z7 II, I have shot quite a number of the 8-bit 4K video using the Z7 II, both in the normal 25 to 30 frames per second and also the 50-60 frames per second. And I have to say, the video quality from the Z7 II is very good. Now, it may not be as good as the Z6 or Z6 II, which use super sampling when you're shooting the normal 4K footage, but to me, to my eyes, the 4K footage from the Z7 II is still very sharp, very clean, with very minimal amount of artifact. The high ISO performance is pretty decent as well. Up to ISO 6400, the video quality still look pretty good. Once you go up to ISO 12800, then you start to see a bit of noise. But I would say even at ISO 25600, the footage from the Z7 II is still quite usable. And if you compare the high ISO 4K footage from the Z7 II with the D850, you can easily see the Z7 II has much better high ISO performance than the D850. With the dual processor, Z7 II's autofocus performance is pretty good. Look at this sequence of photos that I shot at 70mm at f2.8. The camera managed to track my subject pretty well throughout the whole scene. Compare this with the D850. D850's continuous autofocus is still a little bit more reliable and would give me slightly better performance when shooting very fast moving target. But I think for most users who don't need to shoot very fast actions, the difference between these two cameras is pretty small. But there are two big advantages with Z7 II's autofocus system if you compare it with the D850. The first one is Z7 II, it has the face detection and also animal detection, which is something the D850 doesn't have. So that makes it a lot easier when you are shooting portrait or events or shooting some animals. Then you can just switch to one of those autofocus mode and then you let the camera to help you find the target and track the target for you. And the second advantage is the autofocus point on the Z7 II is spread out, pretty much cover the whole frame. So you can put the autofocus point pretty much anywhere, and the performance of all the autofocus point are virtually identical. But with the D850, the 153 autofocus point, they are all relatively positioned center in the frame, so it doesn't really cover the edge of the frame. And also only 99 of the autofocus point are the cross type 1. And this is something that also quite noticeable when I was testing the low light autofocus performance. The Z7 II, according to Nikon, the low light autofocus is down to -3 EV with a f2 lens, while the D850 is down to -4 EV, and I couldn't really find any information about what sort of lens is it, so I assume there's a f1.4 lens. So that means the low light performance is actually identical because this is -3 EV with f2 lens and this is -4 with assuming f1.4 lens. And when I tested, I found that if I am using the center point, center autofocus point with both camera under very low light, the low light autofocus performance is pretty much the same. But when I try to move to the autofocus point more to the edge of the frame, then I noticed the Z7 II actually can focus quite a bit better than the D850 when I'm shooting under very low light condition. That's probably because with the D850, if I don't use one of those cross type autofocus point, the autofocus performance would drop dramatically. Okay, next let's have a look at the image quality from the Z7 II. If you look at the raw output from the Z7 II up to ISO 25600, the picture quality is still pretty good. And if you compare it with the D850, there's actually not too much difference. At ISO 51200, the raw output from the Z7 II is surprisingly usable. And if you compare it with the raw file from the D850, the D850 definitely has more noise. At the maximum ISO 102,400, the raw file from both cameras are not very good quality. While the details retained in the raw file from both cameras are very similar, the Z7 II's raw file has better contrast, it has more accurate color and also less chroma noise. And next, let's have a look at what the raw file will look like if I purposely underexpose it by 7 stops and then I push 7 stops in post-processing. I know this is kind of a crazy test because in real life, nobody is going to underexpose the photo by 7 stops, and definitely not with a mirrorless camera because you can preview the actual exposure, so you couldn't even accidentally underexpose your photo by so many stops in real life. But because the camera sensor in our camera is so good these days, for me to really test the output, I have to do some extreme underexpose and extreme pushing in post-processing, then I can see how does it performs and also what is the difference between two cameras. So this is what the raw file from the Z7 II looks like after I push it by 7 stops in post-processing. And if I put it side by side with the raw file from D850 that gone through the same underexpose and push 7 stop in post-processing, the amount of shadow details that I can recover from both raw file is pretty similar. But if you look at the shadow area, you can see the Z7 has a little bit less chroma noise, and also the picture's overall contrast remains a little bit better if you compare it with the D850. So overall, if you look at the raw files from the Z7 II and the D850, the image quality from the Z7 II is definitely a little bit better than the D850. But the difference is not really that big, and I think if you are not actually pushing the like the high ISO or doing some extreme pushing in post-processing, the difference may not be really that noticeable. But having said that, I think there are two things on the Z7 II which would give you much better image quality if you compare to the D850, and these two things would give you much bigger difference in terms of image quality compared to the difference in the raw file that we have just looked at. The first thing is Z7 II has a 5-axis in-body image stabilizer. What that means is when I'm taking handheld photo using the Z7 II, especially with a lens that doesn't have optical image stabilizer or VR as Nikon calls it, I can shoot at a shutter speed that is a few stops slower, and that means my ISO could be a few stops lower if I compare it with the D850, and that would give me much better image quality. Have a look at this set of sample photos that I shot at a treetop at night. It was pretty dark there, and I was standing on the platform at the top of the tree, so the tree was moving quite a bit. The platform was not completely stable, so the platform itself also moved quite a bit. But in the end, I still managed to capture some pretty sharp photo even at the shutter speed as slow as 0.3 seconds. And my ISO was already at ISO 6400. So if I don't have the in-body image stabilizer, I would have to shoot at probably maybe 2-3 stop higher ISO. So I would be shooting at easily 25,600 or even 51,200. So the image quality would definitely not be quite as good as what I can get with the Z7 II if I was shooting with a D850 instead. And the second thing is, the Nikon Z7 II uses the new Nikon Z lens mount, which is much wider in diameter and also much shorter flange distance, which give Nikon a lot more flexibility in terms of the lens design. So Nikon has already released a number of new lenses for this new Z mount already, and I have tested quite a few of them, and all of them have excellent image quality. And this time when I'm testing the Z7 II, I have also borrowed the new Nikon Z 14-24 2.8 lens, and I also did some comparison with the AFS 14-24 2.8. And when I compared the image quality of this new Nikon Z 14-24 lens with the AFS 14-24 lens, I found there is a big difference in terms of image quality between these two lenses. Not only the new lens is a lot sharper from center to corner, and even at the maximum aperture, the new lens is already very sharp. And other things like, for example, the lens flare control, the new lens is pretty amazing. It's pretty much perfect. Even when I directly shooting into the sun, there's virtually no lens flare. So yeah, in terms of image quality, the new Z lenses are a lot better than the older AFS lenses, even though those AFS lenses are already pretty good already. But yeah, the new Z lenses definitely set a new benchmark in terms of image quality. And there are also some other advantage with the new Z lenses. For example, the autofocus is a lot smoother, and if you want to take video, the video autofocus is also a lot smoother. So is the Z7 II a better camera than the D850? I think I would be lying to you if I say the Z7 II is much better than the D850 in every single area, because it's definitely not the case. D850 still has a few things that it does better than the Z7 II. For example, if you have to shoot very fast actions, I think D850's autofocus system still handle a little bit better than the Z7 II. Also, battery life, the D850 is better than the Z7 II. And also one of the big advantage with the optical viewfinder is you can always look through the optical viewfinder no matter the camera is on and off. And also if you turn it on, you can shoot pretty much immediately, while there's a little bit of delay with the electronic viewfinder on the Nikon Z7 II. But having said that, I think overall the Z7 II is a better camera than the D850. And there are many reasons why I say that. In terms of autofocus, I think if you're shooting very fast action, yeah, the D850 may be a little bit better, but for most other people, the autofocus on the Z7 II is just a lot more flexible. You can put the autofocus point pretty much anywhere and have pretty much the same autofocus performance, and you also have the new face tracking, animal tracking, which is something the D850 doesn't have. And also the electronic viewfinder make it a lot easier and a lot more predictable of what your photo would look like compared to the optical viewfinder. And if you shoot video, the video mode on the Z7 II is definitely a lot better in terms of both the feature and also the video quality. Z7 II's image quality is a little bit better than the D850. Having an in-body image stabilizer is a huge benefit, but I think the biggest advantage is the new Z mount, which allow you to have access to all the new Z lenses, which optically and also feature-wise, it's just a lot better than the lenses that is available for the Nikon F mount.